The 9,089th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2022/546, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Ireland and Norway. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I deliver this statement on behalf of Norway and Ireland. Today, we are meeting to vote on a draft resolution put forward by Ireland and Norway, which would authorise the cross-border humanitarian aid operation in Syria. It's no secret that this has been a difficult negotiation. As penholders, Ireland and Norway have engaged diligently and constructively with all Council members. After the draft resolution we put on the table last week was vetoed, we redoubled our efforts to find a path through so that the Council could adopt a resolution which would allow humanitarians to continue to reach those in dire need in Syria. The result of our efforts is now before you in the form of a new draft resolution. Throughout this process, like so many around this table, Ireland and Norway have been guided solely by the humanitarian needs of the Syrian people. The authorisation for the cross-border operation expired at midnight on Sunday night. For the Syrian people and for all those humanitarians who work diligently to assist them, this has been a long and uncertain couple of days. The fear that vital supplies of aid will be cut generated significant uncertainty and fear. The resolution before us now would renew the border crossing at Bab al-Hawa for 6 months. It anticipates the further extension of an additional 6 months, which will require a separate resolution. Importantly, a special report from the Secretary-General on the humanitarian needs in Syria will inform that decision. We recognise that a 6-month renewal is shorter than we as penholders aimed for when we started this negotiation. We recognise also that the vast majority of the Council shared that view and the view of humanitarian actors on the ground that a 12-month mandate was needed. What is most important today is that the Council, with this resolution, keeps the cross-border mechanism open and operating, that humanitarian assistance continues to reach those in need. This draft resolution will facilitate further early recovery efforts and encourage regular follow-up meetings on implementation. Mr. President, this resolution represents a delicate balance between the different positions of Council members at this time. We are grateful to all Council members for their engagement to this end. Now it's time for this Council to assume its responsibility. We commend this draft resolution to the Council and we ask all members to support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I am making this explanation of vote before the vote on behalf of the E10 in Kenya's capacity as coordinator for the month of July. The E10 appreciates the manner in which delegations have rallied to put foremost the humanitarian needs of the Syrian people. It is in this regard that the E10 commends the extensive efforts by the core penholders to achieve a compromise text that ensures the continuity of the critical humanitarian assistance provided through the cross-border mechanism, which is key to addressing the dire and urgent needs of the Syrian people. Last week, the E10 supported a 12-month renewal, as this would have given humanitarian organizations more certainty in their operations. Ultimately, however, the E10's fundamental interest is for the Security Council to meet the grave needs of the Syrian people. The E10 therefore stands behind the core penholders text as it allows for critical humanitarian assistance to be delivered. We look forward to the continuing effective implementation of the cross-border mechanism as agreed, so that the conditions are in place for its continuation after the coming 6 months. To this end, the E10 will continue to play a constructive role that aims to bridge divides and identify useful compromises that advance the humanitarian well-being of the Syrian people. I reiterate that the E10's pressing interest remains the uniting of the Security Council on this issue and on behalf of the Syrian people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2022/546 please raise their hand? Those abstaining, would they please raise their hand? Those against? The result of the voting is as follows: 12 votes in favor, no votes against, 3 abstentions. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2642. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. I deliver this statement on behalf of Ireland and Norway. As penholders, Norway and Ireland welcome the Council's adoption of this resolution, renewing the authorization for the cross-border humanitarian aid operation into Syria. Throughout this negotiation, Norway and Ireland engage carefully and constructively with all Council members. Our objective has always been clear: humanitarian aid must reach all people in need in Syria. We have listened carefully to the UN and to the humanitarian agencies on the ground. They were clear that given the level of humanitarian need in northwest Syria, the cross-border mechanism must be renewed. They were also clear that for effective implementation of the humanitarian response serving the long-suffering people in northwest Syria, a minimum of 12 months extension was needed. As penholders, we worked for that outcome, and we regret the use of the veto by one member of the Security Council which prevented this. The resolution we're adopted today keeps the critical cross-border mechanism open. It allows for its life-saving humanitarian operation to continue. For those in humanitarian need in northwest Syria who have been in an uncertain situation with the negotiations running into overtime, we can assure them, and that's what matters. The cross-border operation is their lifeline, and today the cross-border operation remains. The Council has a responsibility to put the needs of the Syrian first and to ensure humanitarian relief can reach those who rely on it. As we move forward, it is incumbent upon every one of us to come together for the sake of the people of Syria, to support humanitarian deliveries by any modalities, and to support continued and enhanced early recovery efforts. It is our sincere hope that this Council can build on this adoption to engage in further constructive dialogue on Syria, and above all, to put the needs of the people of Syria at the heart of all that we do. Over 11 years into the terrific conflict, the people of Syria have suffered too much and for too long. Ireland and Norway call for redoubled effort to work towards a political solution in Syria. We urge all parties to engage urgently and constructively with the efforts of the Special Envoy. Finally, Ireland and Norway wish to thank all Council members for their engagement on this important file. We would like to warmly acknowledge the critical role played by the 10 elected members of the Security Council throughout this process. With this resolution, the Council ensures that life-saving humanitarian assistance continues to be delivered to the many millions in need in northwest Syria. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. India welcomes the adoption of the resolution extending authorization of humanitarian assistance to Syria through Bab al-Hawa crossing. Today's adoption will reassure nearly 4 million people in the northwest of Syria, 2.7 million of whom are IDPs, many of whom are women and children. At the same time, we should not lose sight of the fact that more than 14.5 million people across Syria need humanitarian assistance in one form or the other, with essential food items and fuel in short supply. Food insecurity has reached historic highs, and an estimated 60% of the population is food insecure, as per the UN. It is clear, therefore, a decisive forward movement on the political track in Syria remains an urgent imperative to alleviate the sufferings of its people. To realize this, all parties, particularly the external players, need to display their commitment in tangible terms to a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned, UN-facilitated political process in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We reiterate call for enhanced and effective humanitarian assistance to all Syrians throughout the country without discrimination, politicization, and preconditions. While cross-border operations are predictable and important, they cannot continue to exist in perpetuity. Concrete steps need to be taken to address the hurdles that are obstructing the functioning of cross-line operations. Mr. President, humanitarian assistance cannot be a matter of political expediency. Linking humanitarian and developmental assistance with the progress in the political process will only exacerbate the humanitarian sufferings and should be avoided. International community also needs to constructively look at promoting projects which will bring much needed jobs and economic opportunities for the Syrian people. Similarly, early recovery projects which help Syrian people to move in a direction of self-sustenance need a realistic basis to move forward. In conclusion, let me reiterate that India is committed to supporting the people of Syria in their endeavor for seeking lasting peace and stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président.
President, the renewal of the cross-border humanitarian aid mechanism is a relief because this remains a vital mechanism for millions of Syrians. I commend the efforts of Ireland and Norway to reach a compromise. But France will not be satisfied with this precarious renewal for just 6 months, which will expire during the winter at the very moment when aid is the most indispensable, without any firm guarantees of continuation. The call by the Secretary-General and the whole of the humanitarian community to renew this mechanism for 12 months was clear and ignored. This Council is therefore not up to its responsibilities, and this is why France abstained. Our mobilisation, however, remains intact. France will continue to fully assume its humanitarian responsibilities in the spirit of the principles and parameters of the Secretary-General on United Nations assistance in Syria. We shall be extremely vigilant in 6 months' time, when the time for the renewal of the cross-border mechanism comes, to ensure that the Security Council gives the humanitarian community the possibility to meet the immense needs of the people. France remains mobilised to bring an end to the war, and our position and that of our European partners remains unchanged. We will not finance reconstruction and lift sanctions until a credible political process that is inclusive is firmly underway, pursuant to Resolution 2254, adopted unanimously by this Council. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I join others in thanking Norway and Ireland for their work as penholders. The UK approached this renewal, as we have every year since the mandate was first agreed in 2014, on the basis of humanitarian need and humanitarian need alone. Humanitarian need in Syria is the highest it has ever been. 4.1 million people in need of aid across the northwest, of which 2.4 million are reliant solely on the UN cross-border mechanism for life-saving assistance every single month. We've heard repeatedly from the UN and from NGOs that a renewal for 12 months was necessary to provide operational certainty so they could prepare to meet that humanitarian need, especially during the harsh months of winter. Last Friday, Russia stopped this from happening. With today's vote, innocent Syrians can breathe no sigh of relief. The suffering and the uncertainty goes on. Without the confidence of at least 12 months, UN agencies and NGOs risk being caught in a perpetual cycle of pre-positioning and contingency planning. It's therefore important that we are clear. While this renewal is only for an initial 6 months, the intent of the Council is to renew for a further 6 months, subject to another resolution. The Secretary-General's report, requested by this resolution, will be able to set out the implications were this mandate to come to an end in January as winter is setting in. The humanitarian case for a further renewal will be self-evident, and to oppose it would be to ignore the suffering of 4.1 million people. The UK will continue to support the UN's efforts to deliver its humanitarian response plan, but we will not consider providing any reconstruction assistance without a credible, substantive and genuine political process firmly underway. A genuine political process is the only sustainable means of ending suffering in Syria. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, China welcomes the Security Council's adoption of the resolution renewing the authorization for the humanitarian assistance in Syria. We thank Ireland and Norway, as well as Russia and other members, for their active efforts over the past few days to promote a final outcome through intensive communication. Facts have shown that it is normal for members of the Council to have differences on relevant issues. It is only natural that sometimes divergences may be sharp, but as long as we have full political will, persevere in patient consultations and accommodate each other's concerns, we can still find effective solutions to these problems. Ramming through a vote when major differences still exist will only intensify contradictions and differences and will do a disservice to maintaining the unity of the Council and ensuring its effective discharging of its responsibilities. Mr. President, China's position on the humanitarian issue in Syria is as consistent as it is clear. We always maintain that humanitarian assistance to Syria should respect Syria's sovereignty and the ownership of the Syrian government. Cross-line delivery should become the main channel for humanitarian assistance to Syria. Cross-border delivery is a temporary arrangement made under specific circumstances. It is necessary to speed up the transition to cross-line relief and establish a clear timetable for the eventual determination of cross-border relief. Mr. President, the resolution just adopted provides for the necessary flexibility to allow the Council to assess and adjust its mandate in a timely manner. The resolution sets out clear demands for early recovery programs and greater transparency in relief efforts. The bi-monthly informal interactive dialogues of the Security Council are also conducive to concrete follow-ups on the resolution. We expect all parties to strictly abide by the basic principles governing international humanitarian assistance, strictly comply with the requirements of the Security Council resolutions, ensure the neutrality and transparency of assistance, and make it more targeted and effective. In closing, I wish to reiterate that unilateral sanctions severely restrict the operations of the international humanitarian agencies in Syria and run counter to the efforts of the Security Council and the international community to improve humanitarian access and increase humanitarian resources in Syria. China urges the relevant countries to immediately and comprehensively lift unilateral sanctions against Syria. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to first express my delegation's appreciation for the outstanding work done by the penholders, Ireland and Norway, as well as the active engagement of Kenya as the coordinator of the E10 in order to streamline this process. Albania voted in favor of this resolution today. We did so with a sense of deep responsibility, but also with a heavy heart. Last Friday was one of those regretful and dark moments when the Security Council isn't able to live up with its responsibilities, when it produces the contrary of its raison d'être. Our position is outlined clearly and strongly so many times in this chamber, including during the E10 explanation of vote just a few minutes ago, was another one for a better result. We wanted the 4 million Syrians to rely with confidence on this exceptional lifeline, to allow humanitarian actors to plan more adequately and mobilize resources in time. We wanted children, girls, mothers, entire families, as well as those brave humanitarian workers to believe and see that the Security Council is on their side. Last week we failed, ironically, while being right, because we were stopped by a power we do not possess, by a privilege that was misused, the veto. Yes, again, the veto by Russia. We agreed today on this imperfect and difficult compromise because saving human lives is above diplomatic pride or geopolitical scores, because the needs of those millions of Syrians in desperate need come and should come first. We have said it so many times and we maintain it. Those who need help must get help everywhere. By voting this text, we are doing our part with an open heart, not with cynicism, with solidarity, not with calculations. We continue to believe that continuing effective implementation of the cross-border mechanism remains crucial, and that, upon recommendations from the Secretary General, we will be able to extend it for another 6 months next January. Until the new Syria emerges out of the ruins of a war that has entered its 12th year, cross-border assistance will continue to be vital to meet the immense humanitarian needs in northeastern Syria. We must inspire hope and trust to the Syrian people and help them find the way to their future in a dignified way through free choice with their rights respected through a democratic process with effective justice accountability as fundamental parts of it. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
السيد الرئيس بداية
Mr. President, the UAE aligns itself with the statement delivered by Kenya on behalf of the E10. We welcome the adoption of today's resolution to extend the cross-border aid mechanism in Syria, and we are pleased that a compromise has been reached. It reflects the Council's commitment to respond to the massive humanitarian need. It also represents a critical step to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid to all those in need across Syria by all means. As such, we extend our sincere thanks to Norway and Ireland, the penholders of the Syrian humanitarian file, for their tireless efforts in facilitating the negotiations that led to the adoption of this resolution. We also appreciate the cooperation of all Council members in this regard. We stress that the international community must continue its efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people and to ensure access to all basic services. This includes stepping up early recovery projects to respond to the urgent needs on the ground, especially considering the ongoing global food and health crises that are exacerbating around the world. We welcome the inclusion of language in the resolution about electricity projects for the Syrian people. Electricity is a fundamental humanitarian necessity that is essential. Without electricity, essential services such as hospitals and schools cannot function, and millions of Syrians are unable to receive water without it. To conclude, we hope to build on this momentum, especially towards January of next year. It is critical to continue prioritizing the Syrian file in all its aspects on the long term to achieve stability, prosperity, and peace for the Syrian people, that brotherly country, in particular in the Arab world as a whole. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for her statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation supported the adoption of the draft resolution, which was put forward by the informal penholders of the Syrian humanitarian dossier in the Security Council, namely the delegations of Norway and Ireland. It allows the Syrian cross-border mechanism to continue working until January 2023. We note that there is some dissatisfaction expressed by some of our colleagues, and this has to do with the fact that their vision of the extension of the mechanism did not pass. Well, the world is not limited by the Western countries, or the so-called first golden billion, as was imagined in Washington, London, and Paris. And it's time for you to get used to respecting the interests of other states, first and foremost, such states who are impacted directly by the Security Council decisions. Colleagues, finding the optimal way of extending the cross-border mechanism, by doing that, we gave a second chance for the good faith implementation of all aspects of the resolution for the upcoming 6 months. And through the opportunities offered through the informal interactive dialogues within the Security Council, we're going to continue to monitor progress in implementing the resolution we adopted today so as to decide on the ultimate fate of the cross-border mechanism. We're convinced that it's only through candid and substantive dialogue on the issues in the Syrian humanitarian track, whilst involving all of the interested parties, we will be able to, in 6 months' time, come up with a well-considered decision. The special reports of the Secretary General, unfortunately, as was shown by practice, are not sufficient for that purpose. We now need to all work on many important areas, including increasing the deliveries through cross lines in all of the regions in Syria. We call also upon the Secretary General to pay special attention to the need to lift unilateral sanctions in the context of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic still not yet overcome. What is needed and to be as active as possible to make sure that this issue is eliminated in Syria, and this will increase the opportunities for a donor to fund early recovery projects in this Arab country. And we are going to closely monitor the implementation of also all these goals as well, and expect that by January 2023, the Secretary General will provide the Council with exhaustive information on the work done. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also want to thank the penholders. I want to thank them for leading a process with integrity and unquenchable commitment to meeting the needs of the most vulnerable Syrian people. The vote we took this morning is what happens when one council member takes the entire Security Council hostage, with the lives of Syrian men, women, and children hanging in the balance. Right now, the humanitarian needs in Syria are greater than they have ever been. As other colleagues have noted, the Secretary General asked for more. UN agencies asked for more. NGOs asked for more. Syrians asked for more. All these voices told us that a straightforward 12-month mandate for cross-border was the bare minimum, that now was the moment to step up. But one country, one member, has chosen not to put humanitarian needs first. Rather than scaling up, we've been sadly pushed to cut down. This is such a heartless play. It will only serve to hurt the Syrian people. Last year, this council showed there was a different way. The entire council came together to adopt a resolution unanimously that ensured the bare minimum was met. This year, 14 members of the council were prepared to go that route again, but one member stood against it. And now, the last remaining UN-authorized border crossing has been whittled back. This mandate will make the work of humanitarian organizations more costly and more challenging for procurement, staffing, and planning. Let us remember that this mandate exists because the Assad regime has a well-documented history of corruption, of stealing aid and denying it to communities in need. With its brutal behavior and continued attacks on civilians, the cross-border mechanism remains essential to ensure aid is able to reach those in need. Russia continues to defend this brutal regime and treat the Syrian people as disposable. They were already hanging on by a thread, and now that thread could snap. The rest of us will do whatever it takes to get the most vulnerable Syrian people the humanitarian aid they need, and Russia knows that. Some of the recent dire needs in Syria are a direct result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the shocks that brutal invasion has caused to food systems in Syria and around the world. And the simple truth is, Russia does not care. Russia is so brazen in its disregard for Syrian lives that it has not even bothered trying to justify its stance on a humanitarian basis. This is an immoral and cynical approach to humanitarian needs. Let us be clear, the first of the 2 6-month extensions that the Security Council decided upon today will bring us only to January, which will be the very moment when humanitarian needs peak. The weakness of this resolution is that it requires another action from this Council to confirm what should be automatic. But to fail to do so would be unconscionable. It would leave Syrians without blankets or fuel for heat in the dead of winter. It would deprive children of their education, since their schools will not have funding to plan for the second half of the year. We cannot lose sight of the gravity of this decision and what will be at stake. When we talked to the UN and NGOs over the weekend, they told us that a temporary extension was better than nothing. And since our approach to humanitarian aid has always been driven by needs, we are listening to the experts on the ground. That is why we did not stand in the way of this resolution. In the coming months, we will work with our humanitarian partners to stave off the worst-case scenarios we have all been warned about. And we will undertake a hard look at our aid posture in Syria and do everything in power to help those in need. But, Mr. President, as I close, let us not forget the Russian Federation was the only council member to oppose a straightforward 12-month resolution. Despite my Russian colleagues' comments, the entire council voted last Friday. Russia stood alone in complete isolation and used their veto to punish the Syrian people. It bullied council members and continued its merciless approach toward the most vulnerable. We now move forward knowing that the Council voted in solidarity today with the Syrian people and with the principles of humanitarian assistance. The U.S. commitment to the Syrian people will not end with this resolution. We will not turn our backs on those who have been suffering for more than a decade, and we hope the other members of this Council will not do so either. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the government of the Syrian Arab Republic has underlined time and again that it is the main responsible of all matters related to the Syrian people. We have constantly expressed over the past years our keenness to ensure that humanitarian assistance reaches all Syrians all over the country without discrimination or exclusion. The government of my country, in the hardest times, succeeded in facilitating many of the UN convoys and the ICRC's convoys, as well as the partners in the humanitarian work to different parts of Syria. This refutes any allegations propagated by some rival countries and their proxies to justify the extension of the so-called cross-border mechanism, despite the fact that it is a temporary, exceptional measure imposed by circumstances that no longer exist. Mr. President, the delegation of the Syrian Arab Republic has explained in its statement before this Council 2 days ago all Syrian concerns in details on the implementation of humanitarian operations in Syria. We expressed our readiness to undertake serious work with all parties to ensure that all needs are met. What has been achieved today could have been achieved days ago. However, the political selfishness of the P3 Western countries in this Council drove them to abuse the Council yet again. They have used it to garner public opinion by propagating for a disinformation and a media campaign that aims at negatively affecting the governments of Syria and Russia. They are trying to propagate a false impression on their humanitarian anxiousness at a time when they are the ones behind this unethical, inhumane, and illegitimate siege imposed on the Syrian people, which leads to their humanitarian suffering and obstructs the implementation of humanitarian operations. Mr. President, all what my delegation has requested in cooperation with friendly delegations in the Security Council is to introduce enhancements in the text of the draft resolution that would ensure the adequate response to the humanitarian needs in a balanced, transparent, and measurable manner to enhance the humanitarian situation of the Syrian people and their livelihood, as well as to alleviate their suffering, including through promoting the early recovery projects, especially in the critical sector of electricity, which has been included in the text of the resolution that was adopted by the Council. My delegation urges the Secretariat of the United Nations to include in the Secretary General's report requested by that resolution to include a meticulous assessment of the humanitarian needs in Syria, quantitatively and qualitatively, as well as the geographical distribution of those needs, in addition to the impact of the unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States of America and the European Union on responding to such needs. To conclude, my delegation appreciates the flexibility of the delegation of the Russian Federation to facilitate the adoption of this resolution. We also call for the strict implementation of the contents of this resolution without selectivity, discrimination, or politicization. We look forward to the informal interactive dialogue sessions referred to in the resolution, which would present a platform to review and follow up the implementation of that resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement. There are no more speakers inscribed on the list. The meeting is adjourned.